focusing on, thank you for recording. Today, we're really focusing on building and diving into what it takes to build a financially sustainable education solutions. The first task for you is just to please write your name, the name of your organization, and the part of the world you're joining us from in the chat. And as you have just heard from that little announcement, the session is being recorded so we can also share it with more people. In terms of just a couple of guidelines and expectations, so we all have a great time in the session. Just to set up the expectations, this is a safe space for sharing your opinions and experiences. You will not be judged. This is not a test. This is really a space for you to bring what is on your mind and share it with the experts. We've got Chris, who's going to be helping you navigate through the various exercises with expert input, and we've got each other. A lot of us are facing similar challenges, so there's a lot of wisdom in the room. So really, please use this space to share your opinions and experiences. If you do want to ask a question, ideally, please raise your hand and use virtual reactions to engage. The hearts, the claps, the question marks, just so that we are getting a sense of where you are in the room and it's as interactive as possible. If possible, if your internet connection allows, and if you're comfortable with it, please keep your camera on. We'll try to keep our cameras on as much as possible as well. Always gives a bit of a personal touch. I'm appearing in my really festive flair today with baubles, but we would love to see you however you're appearing today. In terms of expectations, we would really love your full attention. The session is for you to get as much benefit as possible. So if you're able to, it's a nice time to switch off from other tasks and notifications, so that also it's a more relaxed experience for you. Engage with each other as much as possible, ask questions, build on each other's ideas, and comment in the chat, reacting to what other people are saying. And then just being open and if you're open to it, you can share your contact information as well in the chat if you want to connect with people after the session. So a little bit about the GSF, in case you don't know us super well. We are an organization that really believes that all children should realize their full potential through safe access to quality education. At the center of our organization sits a wonderful, beautiful community of local innovators that are rooted in their realities, really trying to solve for access to that quality education, often in really difficult, challenging circumstances, improving access and quality of education to underserved children. On the map, you can see in orange are the different countries where our members operate. So it's quite a diverse community. Our members work across 70 countries, and we are coming up close to 200 organizations in our community. It's quite amazing. And then in terms of GSF, what do we do with this community and for this community? We basically help to facilitate collaboration. We facilitate and provide access to stronger know-how through sessions like this, but also different products and resources. We help to unlock smarter funding and system-level partnerships for the members in our community. So today we've got the pleasure to be joined by Chris Harris-Van Keuren. That probably pronounced that wrong, but welcome, Chris, to the second session. We had Chris in the first session with us last week to really help us dive into understanding how governments think about budgeting is a very relevant issue for many members in our community. And today we've got the second opportunity to connect with Chris and ask her questions and allow her to look into some of the challenges that our organizations are facing and get her wisdom and knowledge to help us muddle through them. So welcome, Chris. You can see Chris's credentials on the page here. I won't read it all out, but she is a specialist in economics and financial analysis of global development projects, humanitarian crisis, and government projects and budgets as well. And then just a brief recap before I hand over to Chris about the first session. So if you were here, this is a recap. If you missed the first session, don't worry. We'll be taking you through the content that is, both sessions can work independently, but they've got some content that builds on one another. So just to bring you up to speed, in the first session, we really focused on how governments think about education budgets, what it means for aligning non-state education solutions to this public financing. We looked at an example from South Africa, early years maths program, which transitioned from donor funding to government funding. And we looked at what we can learn in terms of the financial analysis of that case study about the different strategies that help to integrate solutions into existing government budgets. Top 5 takeaways from that session before I hand over to Chris. Number 1, understand how government line item budgets map onto your solution. So it's a bit of like a detective investigative activity of really in detail gathering information of line item budgets of your government on education. How is the money being spent? Understanding the government language on costs, especially when it comes to what is already budgeted for and therefore seen as no additional cost versus what is not in those line item budgets already and therefore what will be seen as additional cost by the government to potentially embed your solution into the national framework. Knowing, really going again, investigative activity, knowing who makes decisions in your country or in your region, in your area where you want to work. Is it the Ministry of Finance? Is it the Ministry of Education? At what level are the decisions made? So I think Chris said sort of knowing the Ministry of Education and the relevant government bodies as well as your family is the advice to really help navigate through that. Obviously, understanding wider system and the political, financial, social context you're working with is super important. And then finally, identifying government priority goals and roadblocks to achieving the government priority goals, and then aligning your solutions to help them achieve what they want to achieve anyways. That's a little bit of a snapshot. I will pause here and hand over to Chris.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Hello, everybody. It is so good to see you here. Good to see friends that I have seen in the room in the last session and new friends. Let me tell you a little bit about how I like to operate. First, just to get a little feel of who's in the room and just in general, if you could just type in the chat how you feel about costing. Have you done costing before? Do you think it's terrifying? Do you think it's the most fun thing? Okay, there are only a few of us probably on the globe who think it is the most fun thing. But in the chat, if you could just talk to me a little bit, because sometimes these can be difficult because I can't see you. Like, I mean, I can see your names, but I can't like see you. So if you could just type in the chat how you feel about it, then it'll give me a sense of where we are. Abdul, costing to know our limits. That's very fair. That's a fair comment. All right. And if you've done it before, if you've not done it before, just in general, how you feel about it. I'll go ahead and get my slides loaded while you do that. Let me get this up. I agree, Caroline. It's super fun, but it is super challenging. I mean, it's also this really incredibly intimate thing that you do because you're talking about your overhead. You're talking about how much people cost. I mean, it can be a little intimidating, right? Okay, let me go ahead and get started, but you just keep talking to me, okay? And I'll get started. Let me see if this is gonna go for me. There we go. All right, so we have a lot to do today. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So this is the agenda for today. I'm going to talk to you about the general purpose of the agenda. I'm going to give you some cost analysis terms. I'm going to give you an example, completely fictional. There's nothing real about this example at all. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how cost analysis structures, what they can look like, and why they can look like that, because it can make your life easier. And I'll explain that to you. Then we're going to have 2 parts to the exercise that we're going to do today. The first part is we're going to stress test a solution, and I'll tell you all about it. You're going to love it. The next part is we're going to do like a test to see if there are challenges with that solution for sustainability and scale. And again, I'll walk you through that, and then we'll talk about it, and then we'll have a general wrap up, okay? All right. And if there are things that you want to know along the way that I'm not talking about, feel free to put it in the chat, because I look like NASA at the moment. I have multiple screens going on my laptop. So I can see your chat, I can see my slides, I can also see if you have a hand raised. So I am here for you. And just ask me the questions. All right, so here's the purpose of what we're going to do today. Today is all about stress testing a solution and to provide a practical framework for how to document stakeholders' contributions, and most importantly, what do you do with that? Also, we're going to talk about integration with governments in light of your intended relationship with them, because everybody has different goals in how they're working with their governments. And so we want to just acknowledge that people are coming from different places and moving forward. And always, it's to be able to assess sustainability and scalability, because the last thing we want is for you to go out there and have an incredibly successful solution that makes a difference in people's lives and then not be able to sustain it and scale it. That is like the worst possible scenario out there. And so we want to try to mitigate that as much as possible. You're working hard. We want to try to help you get that integrated and to sustain it. Okay. So what's cost analysis? I'm going to give you the official former USAID definition for cost analysis, which is a systematic identification and analysis of all the resources that you're going to need to create and to deliver a solution or a set of solutions. Okay. It can be just financial data, what's coming out of your accounting systems, but it can also include contributions, things that people are donating or providing, like time. Time is by far the biggest one, or different resources like spaces. It can include that too. And it's important to recognize costing is always to whom, always to whom. And so it is, are we talking about what it costs to everybody that's involved, all of the different stakeholders? Or are we talking about just one or two particular stakeholders, like whoever the donor is? Or maybe the focus is on what it's going to cost the government. But always remember, when somebody says this is what it costs, your first question should be to whom? Okay. Costing can be done retrospectively. The activity has already been done, and now you're just going to analyze the data. Concurrent, meaning it's happening right now. You're implementing it, and you want to assess to see, can we do better with the resources we have in real time? Or prospective, you're looking at something in the future to see how much it might cost, and hopefully being able to compare several different solutions and determine which one might be either the most cost efficient or the most cost effective moving forward. And often people just call this costing. I mean, so if you hear costing, this is probably what they're talking about. All right. If you have any questions on that, you just ping me, okay? Otherwise, just give me like a thumbs up to let me know that you're still okay with me. Are we okay? Okay, I'm going to assume we're okay. Unless you tell me otherwise, we're okay. All right, let me move on. All right, so then thank you, Caroline. So then the next question is, all right, so if that's costing, then what is value for money? Everybody keeps talking about value for money. What is that exactly? Like, really, what is it? So value for money is just a concept of spending resources in a way that are maximized for your intended outcomes or outputs. It's a way of thinking about the different activities and being able to choose what is going to work best in a given situation. There is no single commonly accepted definition or framework for value for money at this moment. But I can tell you that originally it came from DFID, may she rest in peace, the 4 E's framework, like economy, efficiency, effectiveness, and equity. And that's the most widely recognized kind of framework and way that we think about it in costing, is these 4 E's. It can also be thought of, some people think of it as a suite of methods, not just 1 or 2 methods, but maybe a suite of them, which could be cost economy, which is just running the numbers to see how much something cost. Anytime you run a budget, like to go to the grocery store, congratulations, you just did cost economy. You do it every day. You just don't know you do it. And then cost efficiency, which is you're going to put a denominator to it and say, this is how much it costs per person, or adding cost effectiveness, which is this is how effective we are for this, and here's the cost per person in order to make that impact happen. Okay. So VFM, you can think of it as like as a qualitative judgment about the value of the investments based upon the objectives, the context, and all of the different data you have. Okay. So hopefully that helps. That's kind of cost analysis is actually running the numbers. Value for money can be thought of as, okay, that's amazing. What do you do with it? Okay. Any questions? You just ping me. All right, now I'm going to give you a few definitions, okay? So you might hear about ingredients and resources, often used interchangeably. These can be the same thing. This is just the individual resources you need to either develop or implement it. Like let's say Tej. Tej is working on an activity. We're going to say this is how much Tej's time is. Tej can either be thought of as a resource, as a lovely human being, or as an ingredient. Okay, so this is what that is. Then you can have implementation or development costs. Okay, listen to me on this. If there's nothing else you get out of this session, remember this point. All right, are you here? So development costs are what it costs to develop, right? The activity. And implementation cost then is what it costs to implement it and keep it moving forward. Here's why this is incredibly important in your lives. Is because if you are trying to think about how much it costs to scale or sustain something, you need to know how much it costs to implement. Development is usually, you can think of, Kira and I were talking about this yesterday, is often as like a one-time cost or a set of costs in a given period of time. But then implementation costs can be moving forward. This will be super important when you're thinking about how much will it cost for the government or donors or whomever to sustain and scale this, okay? Now, it can be more of an art than a science about where implementation costs and development costs end, like where that line is. But often we just have to make a decision and decide, okay, moving forward, this is it. All right. Do we feel good about that? How do you feel? Ross, don't worry about, oh, Caroline, go ahead.
Yeah, just to clarify that, so can there be some development costs that would continue at an implementation cost rate, but at like a much lower level? Like say it's like a curriculum revision, like you have to do a whole curriculum upfront, which could say cost $100,000, but then there might be smaller revisions every year or every few years that would cost $20,000. And that would
Yeah.
again be considered implementation if it needs to happen in order to continue kind of scaling and then ensuring quality?
Yeah. So there's two ways you can think about this, Caroline. And it's a great question. And I get this question often with technology, like you're constantly tweaking and applying and improving improving apps. So often you can think of development if there's aspects of a tool or the curriculum that are um, how do I want to say it, that are directly related to just base, just fundamental, this is what we have to do every year. However, a different way to think about it is if the changes that you are making are based on feedback that you are getting in your implementation, I would count it as an implementation cost because it's a feedback loop. You're improving it, and you may not otherwise have improved it without that feedback loop. How do you feel about that? You feel good about it?
Yeah, I
Okay.
feel good about that. Thanks.
Okay, good. Abdul, research costs. You want to say more about that for me, please? If you can unmute. If you can't unmute, I understand.
Yeah, I just want to know where we have to add the research cost.
Yeah.
Uh,
Can you give me
is
an
is
example?
it part of development cost?
Can you give me an example of a research cost?
To have the accurate, to find out the accurate solution. So we have to analyze multiple solution and then to finalize the one solution for the development. So what about the cost that we spend on finding out a right solution?
It's a good question. I think I think I might still bucket that under development because it's not input. Yeah, Caroline, I would go with you on this. I wouldn't say that that's implementation. I say what you do with that. And once you start actually serving beneficiaries, once you start reaching your target audience in a way that should improve the impact and they're learning whatever that is, that's when we're kicking into implementation cost. How do you feel about that, Abdul?
No, it's before the finalization of the solution.
Yeah.
Development is the development of a solution. So what is the right solution to find out that we might have to incur a research cost? So
Yeah.
this is pre-development cost. You may say pre-development cost.
It could be. It could be just research costs. Yeah, you could just bucket it under research costs, or you're just doing your background check on it. Yeah, you could do that too. So it could either not be development at all. It could just be flat out research costs. It could be development costs. But I don't think implementation costs because you're not reaching your audience. But yeah, you could have that as an entirely different category if you wanted to. Okay? These are
Okay,
good
okay,
questions.
thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, perspective taking. Perspective taking is when, as I said before, the cost to whom. And so people will say in economic analysis that something is from a social perspective if it includes all of the stakeholders. Now, that can be confusing because people think social perspective and they think society, maybe they think communities. But if you hear somebody say, this analysis is done from a social perspective, that means they included all the stakeholders, whether they donated the resources or paid for them. Now, scale and sustainability, hopefully we're good on both of those terms. Scaling, though, let me just make sure we're clear, can either be scaling in a given context or outside that context to more people or a bigger geographic area. So you might still be in one geographic area, but scaling to more people in that area, or it could be geographically to other areas. Okay. Now, sustainability. Often I hear people talk about sustainability as like a singular thing. Sustainability is not a singular thing. You can kind of think about sustainability in terms of what is financially sustainable versus what is implementation-wise sustainable or technically sustainable. So you can think about this in different ways because you may have something that it is ready to go. You can implement this, it is sustainable in that manner, but it is just not financially sustainable. So you can bucket that in two different ways. All right. Now, here's my completely made up, has no bearing to reality example that I'm going to give to you. So this is called Read to Me. And I just want to show you this for a few reasons. One, it's just a really simple example of what a cost analysis might look like. And it just gives you a little bit of rooting into some of the terms that I've given you. All right, so let me show you a couple of things on this. So first of all, you can have your cost categories and your resource categories. Do you see them there clear on the left-hand side? So you can have general operations and management. You can have reporting to the donor. Abdul, if you want, this is where you can have your research costs kerplunked right in there as a different line. So it doesn't interact with development or implementation costs. You can see for in-service teacher training, this example, I just put implementation costs. But you could have development costs, but I'm pretending in this one that the organization has already done the development costs and now maybe in a different activity and they're just rolling it out into a new activity. There's teaching and learning materials. You can see how we have development and procurement and distribution costs as being separate things. And in here, overhead is assumed to be integrated into these things. Now, you can have overhead as its own individual line, and that's often what happens. Or like this, it might be embedded into those different categories. Okay. So here's this. Now, here's what I want you to focus on with this. Let's take a look at in-service educator training for a second. Again, implementation only. So first of all, we have the cost to the donor, the government, and let's say the private sector. Let's say there's no cost donated or otherwise from, let's say, parents. So here you can see with the implementation costs, what I want you to focus on is how the costs are different by the different stakeholders. Totally normal. Would be weird if they were the same. And so for the donor, especially in year one, they're probably going to have the highest cost because they might have some development costs and some upfront costs they have to get going. Then we have the government, and then we have the private sector. Year 2, you can see the costs are different than year 1. They probably should be, because year 1, you're launching your things. You're launching teacher training, or you're getting the books published, or whatever it might be. But those are going to be in year 1. So it is totally normal for year 1 and year 2 costs to be completely different, and completely normal for the costs for the different stakeholders to be different. Okay, so that's that. Now take a look at this. So donor, you can see here that with the donor, for example, their cost in the grand total for year 1 is 88,000. Their grand total for year 2 is going to be 61,000. But you can take this and you can also see why and how the costs are different per year. So, and people can get confused on this, because they'll say, well, what is the cost per person, or what is the cost effectiveness? If you're doing it per year, it's probably going to be different. Often people will take it and they will say, here's the analysis at the end of all of the years. But you're going to see variability as you go, because things are moving. This is a dynamic process, right? So you can see the student costs are different for year 1 and year 2, and the per teacher training costs are wildly different. Okay, and so here's what this looks like. Now at the end, I could have a whole nother sheet that gives the average cost across these years for all the stakeholders. I didn't include that for the sake of minimizing slides, but I think you can get a general idea of it. At the end, what I did put, though, is I put how much it cost for all of the stakeholders. So you can see the grand total at the very end is 210,000. The cost per student is $84. And the cost to train each teacher is $1,500. And I'm not sure about $1,500. I'm going to look at that again. Yeah, no, it's $1,500 because of the cost to the private sector. Okay, moving on. Now, cost analysis structure. Let me give this to you. This is a way of thinking about costs that will help you so you don't miss something. Now, here's what's important about this is, when you're cleaning up your house, and then general operations costs, Abdul, were only in column 1 because they were the people paying for it. The government was not going to pay for that, nor was the private sector. And so that's why it's being included in the donor column. Okay. Keep asking questions. I can see you. So, when you're, okay, so my kids, they used to have a million tiny toys, like tiny, tiny toys all over my house, right? Because they're playing with it, and it was like an explosion took place. But at the end of the day, we have to take those tiny toys and we have to put them in different like bins, buckets. Think of it as, the Legos, which ones go in which bins. And so here you can take your individual like resources and you can have them in different bins so that they make sense and everything is organized. So some of the cost categories that you might have, these might be what your bins are called. You can have your general operations, management and reporting, assessments and evaluation. You might have capacity strengthening of the government, pre-service teacher training, in-service teacher training, teaching learning materials, technology. Again, you could have overhead as a column at the bottom. So, and these are just examples. It's whatever makes most sense for your organization are the cost categories that you're going to have. But then you can have these subcategories. And this is what we talked about earlier, where it can be development and implementation versus development and procurement, just so you can separate what is development, what is not development, or in Abdul's point, what is research. Now, then here's where you have all your tiny little things. Your people, your places, materials, technology, transportation, all that stuff. And you can have all these things in all of these different categories, right? Because you're going to have people working in all of these different categories. So you can have that in there. Abdul is asking me, implementation is not in teaching and learning materials. It can be in teaching learning materials, like moving forward. So you could have something in there like development, procurement, and let's say moving forward costs, like what am I trying to say? Replacement costs. So you can have another one in there for replacement costs, which is kind of like the same as implementation, Abdul. So you can have that in there. All right. Moving on. Everybody okay? Okay. Now, here's what we're going to do. Thank you, Abdul. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to move to an activity where we're kind of going to put these ideas on paper, which is, or in this case, online. So we're going to have you think about one solution. I want you to write down your biggest individual resources to implement that solution. We're not going to get wrapped up in development or research, just to implement it, all right? And when I say your biggest individual resources, that can either be money-wise, what's the biggest individual resources money-wise, or just in terms of importance. Let's not be picky about this. Just what do you think are the most important resources to implement? We're going to list the stakeholders who are going to be involved in donating or paying for these different resources. And then this is the part that is really where the rubber meets the road, is identify if the resource is a development cost, an implementation cost, and some notes about that resource and in the column of who's responsible for paying for them. All right, you want to see an example? Okay, I'll give you an example. Here's one. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to go away and we're going to just get into individual groups, and we're going to pick somebody in your group to use as your very willing victim, volunteer for this, and list the most important resources on the left-hand side, okay? Then you're going to list who are the stakeholders who are responsible for either paying for or donating those resources. So we're going to have that across the top. So far, easy. But then here's what you're going to do. Now you're going to tell me, are these costs a development cost? Are they an implementation cost? Or they could be a little bit of both. Like, for example, project manager time as development, and there's also that person involved maybe in year one of implementation because you need them to help hand off to, let's say, the government. And then in parentheses, I put like a little bit of information just to help like root what we're talking about. So you can see like head teacher time, that maybe they need the head teacher to be involved for development and for implementation, and it's an ongoing cost. Like we need this head teacher to be involved, and that would come from the government. Parent time, where you don't need them, let's say for development, they weren't involved in that, although they should have been, but they weren't involved in that. But let's say they're involved in implementation. And why? Well, because there's a parent-teacher association. Okay, great. And so you can see these other ones and how I have like original training versus refresher trainings. Abdul, here's your point. If you look at designing training workbooks, you can have development training here and then implementation for replacement costs. So you can have that there. So that is exactly your point, and you can see it right on that line. And so you can see this going all the way down. And then you can see, like, for example, tablets and technology, super important, right? How the original purchase would maybe done by the private sector, but replacements are going to be the responsibility of the government. So this is what I want like your Excel to look like. And then we're going to come back, we're going to talk about this, and then there's a part 2 that we're going to move to. So let me pause for a second there to see if you have any questions. And then we'll break into our groups. I'll pause for Kiara or Tesh or questions.
Maybe it's just worth sharing the actual template that we're going to be inviting you to populate. So I think replace current share. I might replace your share, Chris, to show people the
Sure.
the document that they're going to be filling out. So this is where you should be once we give you all the links in your groups. You have a bit more, you have basically the instructions for activity 1. So far, do not worry about activity 2. That's for later on in the session. So just focus on activity 1. This is what Chris has already described in terms of what you need to do. So just scroll down in this document you've got some examples that Chris just went through, so you can also remind yourselves of these different categories that are prompts. And then you basically just scroll down in the document to the number of the group that you're going to be assigned for. So if you're in group 1, you're scrolling down to here, fill in here the name of the solution that you've picked to focus on, and then just start populating. Equally, if you're in group 2, you would scroll down to group 2, etc.
Okay, so we will get everybody populated into their groups, and then we will move around to help you. You're going to have about 20 minutes to work on this, so plenty of time. Again, just focus on one person in your group, and you can even just identify across the top the stakeholders. If you have questions, though, we will come around. So be sure and let us know if something is absolutely unclear to you, and we'll help you out.
If it's all good, I'll go ahead and open the rooms, and then Kiara and Chris can go into the rooms then.
Sounds good.
I think that was helpful. I think those last few minutes were helpful. But why don't we go ahead and have a few people just talk about their tables? And since I was in group one, and group one is group one, so we can start with group one and get some feedback on how that went and some insights that were learned. Okay, I'm not sure who's presenting from group one though.
Lisa, we were chatting about peace, so do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I can I mean, our table is like, it's just our initial thoughts, but happy to talk a little bit about how we approach this. So we chose a peas program to kind of map out on a table, which is a system strengthening program that's focused on school improvement. So supporting government school leaders to create a cycle of improvement in their schools. So I think the biggest takeaway we had is that it's hard to map out a static table for a program, which I'm sure everyone can relate to, that changes a lot and also year on year is dynamic and costs shift for different stakeholders. But we kind of just tried to take a snapshot of almost kind of where we are now, or like when it's still very much implementation coming from an organization rather than something maybe that a government has adopted into the system. So our biggest resources were really the people that make the program possible. So we've got the P's school improvement officers who are going to the schools. We've got the school leaders who are a massive stakeholder in the program. And then we've got the middle tier government officials who are also like a huge collaborator and really vital to the sustainability of the program. And then we had a chat about fuel, which I'm sure a lot of people can also relate to, being just like a huge cost and also like a huge challenge to work around. The cost of fuel to get people to the schools, to get people to the trainings, is one of the biggest cost drivers of the program. So the balance of that over time is an interesting one to think about. And then the trainings, which are a big part of the program as well for the school leaders. And then, on Christine's advice, we just gave Emily its whole own row because it really does involve lots of things around development. So developing tools, developing processes, developing dashboards, etc. And then also the implementation of going to the schools, collecting the data, etc. So those are just kind of, I think, the biggest pillars of the program. And we tried to split it out between government and donors in a static way. We did address that, like, over time, we would want that to maybe the balance to shift away from totally donor and more to government, but that is a very long process, not without its own challenges to advocacy and buy-in, etc. That was a bit of a simplification of our conversation, but it was a really helpful exercise to practice on.
So, and a couple of the things that we talked about too, and thank you for that very much. A couple of the things that we talked about is often when I'm in a room with people, but this is difficult to do kind of online, is do this year by year. What's this look like year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4? And so then you can actually, and the example I gave, which seems to work for my brain for some reason, is animation, how individual slides capture a moment in time, but if you add them together, you can see movement. And that's exactly what you want to be able to see, is movement across these tables in terms of what's moving away from donors, what's moving into government, and development potentially going away, and then moving in more into implementation. So if you can do this across time, and as we talked about in our group, is one of the goals of this, there are many goals, but one of the goals is to teach you how to think like in a cost analysis strategic way without using a single number. We haven't talked about a single number in any of these tables. And so it's how to think about that. Now you can use it for numbers and you can start populating it with numbers, but right now all we're trying to do is think strategically about how you use this to help you with sustainability and scale and just viability of the program. Okay. All right. So that was, and I see Angie, hi Angie, is saying that focus on group 1 and 2 because somebody in group 3 had to leave. So let's see what group 2 had to say. And I apologize, I don't know who's presenting for group 2.
This is I will be presenting on behalf of the group 2. I belong to the Citizen Foundation operating in Pakistan, Karachi. So our solution is government-private partnership. So we run schools in Pakistan. We have our own schools, as well as we have a school partnership with the government where the infrastructure, building, land, and other capex items are to be arranged by the TCF from the specific donors. And once the school is ready for the operations, the government provide a fixed cost per child per month for the school operations. So we have a number of costs like infrastructure, furniture, land and building that is to be provided by the donor. Then we have running cost, teacher salary, recruitment, children's uniform, books copies, stationery and printing. For this, the government provide only a fixed amount per child per month, and rest of the cost is to be borne by the from general donation or by the TCF. We also have our training department where we provide, where we develop training modules as well as we train our teachers. So the government also provide a fixed amount per child per month, and rest of the cost is borne by the TCF. Then marketing and admin costs, no funding from the government. We have to bear that cost. R&D, we develop our own books, and we also incur R&D costs on training modules, how to operate these schools, how to run these schools, how to evaluate these schools. All such R&D is to be borne by the TCF. Then annual assessment, monitoring, evaluation, some of the costs is borne by the government, rest of the by the TCF. Then we have to maintain the school, repair and maintenance. Some of the cost is borne by the government, rest is by the TCF. Last one is the vehicle cost. That is, we operate in a very remote areas of the country to provide education to the less privileged students of those areas. So it's a challenge for us to hire quality teachers within that locality. So if a teacher belongs to another locality or come from a very far long, we have to provide pick and drop service, and that cost is to be borne by the TCF as well. So that is from group 2.
Fantastic. Now, the only thing I would suggest for this, Abdul, is like when you say training, there's lots of resources included in training. There's people, there's locations, there might be stipends, there might be fuel again. So you might want to have to tear apart training into what those individual resources are. So you may have to do that. Same with R&D, you might have to do that. But I think this is, for both groups, an amazing first shot. I think it is a really good first place to begin with this. So, and you absolutely have the concept of what to put where, how to think about development versus implementation. Really, really a good job. Sad we can't see group 3. But we'll go ahead and we'll stick with 1 and 2 at this moment. I don't know if group 3 had any questions or comments, even though you can't present, that you just wanted to talk about. Because I just don't want to ignore you, because that's just rude. Okay, I'm going to assume we're okay with group 3. All right, instead of going back into groups for the sake of time, what I'd like to do is, if it's okay with Tej and Kiara, is just stay here and talk about the part 2 of this exercise. I'm going to go ahead and reshare my slides. Thanks, Kiara. Let me see if that will let me replace the share. There we go. Okay, here we go. So now here's what you do with this. It's after you have kind of a general idea of where you are. And again, you could have done this year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. For the sake of time and brevity, we've just put this on a single static. But here's what's super important that you do with this now, is that you think about projecting out 5 years. Okay, so who's paying or contributing? So you take it to the end. And let's say that you are trying to hand off to the government. Working on a PPP is a slightly different thing, but let's focus on a handover at the moment. Who's paying or contributing for these resources in 5 years? Think about that. Now, scaling sustainability challenges could exist within this activity. So I'm going to give you, and let's just have a little bit of a conversation here while we're all together. As, for example, the structure of the relationship may affect how you think about financing these resources. As I just mentioned, if you are trying to structure a PPP versus a full government handover, how you think about this financing might be different. If you are thinking about a handover as a full government handover, your job is essentially to work yourself out of a job. And that is a completely different way to think about something than an ongoing collaborative environment. Okay, so really important. And it's different too when you are thinking about a full government handover. If you're thinking about it as I'm trying to teach them not to need me, then how you approach things, how you think about things are fundamentally different than I'm engaging in a long-term relationship here. Totally different things. And that also affects financing in different ways. Okay, so that's number 1. You can also think about, are we leaning into donor funding too much? And government systems too little? If so, you might have a sustainability issue that the government may just not be able to pick it up. Like one of the things that came up in our group was how difficult fueling was. And it is so expensive, but so important too, because if you are wanting that really hands-on, collaborative, you want to get in there and have conversations with people, they may be budgeted by the government, and that time may already be in there, but the fuel's not. The fuel might not be in there. And so as you're thinking about that, then that's potentially a sustainability issue. That doesn't mean you don't do it. It just means you have to have a conversation about it. And you're thinking about scaling sustainability, different languages, different community practices and priorities, the availability of different resources. And I even have travel in here because I see that problem that you guys are talking about, that it might be easier to reach one area because it just costs less. You have the fuel to get there than to get to someplace else. And also when we're thinking about scaling and sustainability, you could have stakeholder fatigue. If you're leaning into your donor too much, they may be at a point where it's like, we need this to hand off. We're ready for this to hand off. And if your funding is wobbly, then handing off sooner rather than later in a way that is still going to maintain effectiveness is going to be really important. And so what I want to do in our group here is just have a conversation about when you think about projecting your solution out 5 years, what potential scaling and sustainability challenges might you come up with? We know, and you can either type this or just talk to us. We know fueling is one, for sure. We know that's a fact. Fueling is definitely a problem. But what other things, if you're thinking about projecting your activity out 5 years, what other scaling sustainability challenges might you be looking at? And let me see if I can see hands raised, because I think right now I just have my screen. Okay.
I think you can just probably unmute at this point to come in.
I think that's great. So people just come off mute and just talk to us. This is the best way we're going to learn, is from each other on different challenges and solutions that people are facing with scaling sustainability. So just open your mics and just talk to us. What are you finding out there? Especially now. Especially now. Okay,
Ashmar just asked if we can repeat the question.
Yep. The question is, when you think about projecting your activity out 5 years, what scaling and sustainability issues might you face? Okay. At TFC, okay, Abdul, what are you saying here? We're focusing on small donation products like support a child and investing. And how is that a sustainability or a scaling challenge for you, Abdul?
So at TCF, the big donors, we have to engage with the big donors, and big donors are very limited. In past few years, we decided to reach the public at large. So we are investing in small products like support a child. For example, you have to invest only 2,500 rupees to support a child per child per month. So an individual can donate 2,500 per month. Instead of we have to find out a donor who can invest 5 million per year for a school. So we are investing in products like this. Then we are also investing in digital platform. Like you can type 11111 and on TCF, and then you can donate 100 rupees for TCF. So these are the digital platform we are investing, so that we can capture the public at large. We can spread our donation base, and we can reduce our reliance on the big donors and spread our donation base.
Got it. That makes great sense. Thank you for sharing that example. Ashwar, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is around understanding government budgets, right? I know we spoke a bit about this in the last session, but from a scale and sustainability perspective, in planning the solution, definitely a just difficult thing is understanding government budget. And that's not just necessarily as an implementation org looking to do this. It's that government officials themselves don't have certainty over what government budgets may or could look like. So that is definitely a challenge when thinking about how do you build this both for scale and sustainability. Is if the government officials aren't certain themselves for whatever reasons, and there's a variety, then how do you build these solutions, and what should be your rate of scale, right? If they don't have certainty of sustainability. So it's balancing scale and sustainability and how quickly you need to do that when there's uncertainty around those environments.
Oh, it's such a good point. It is such a good point, especially like when I look at a government's numbers and I look at their budgets versus their actual expenditures. I mean, we're talking about the difference between fact and fiction, right? Like, or they're just incredibly different things. And some things are set, some things, but most of the time there's a lot of wobble that are going on in year to year, and you know, what numbers you can trust versus what numbers you can't trust can be really challenging depending on the political winds and what's happening in the country at the time, because emergencies happen, problems happen, like things happen. And so your point is well taken of how do you build it on a foundation that even with the people you're talking to, they're doing the best they can under difficult situations, like the best they can. Liza?
Yeah, I totally agree. And something that I also thought of as you were speaking was around the fact around uncertainties also with elections. Like priorities can like massively shift. You know, your previous like champion within the government could be no longer in that position, and you could be dealing with someone who wants something totally different. So that is something that we've grappled with every few years, especially when you're working across multiple countries. It means different timelines, and you know, just being ready for things to maybe get shaken up a little bit unexpectedly.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it can be, and also something that I advise when people are working with governments is to really understand that political climate, if elections are coming up, because often then what the government will want to lean into are what are the successes that have been happening? What can you build and expand upon? Not really a great time to be talking about all of the challenges that are happening in an education system at that moment. And so being really sensitive to those political winds and the social, taking the temperature of the society and how the society is feeling about the education system. I mean, none of us are disillusioned by the fact that education comes across as being a very warm, loving, amazing sector. But I mean, there's a lot of power play involved in education, who gets taught, in what languages get taught. So there's a lot to the ed sector, and being very careful about what equity looks like, what political change and wins look like, what the society looks like, all critical and very realistic. All right, we've got 3 minutes left. I'm going to go ahead and give you some final wrap-ups. Let's see. Can you see my screen? You can, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. Let me move on. Let me just give you a few key takeaways from this, and then we will call it a day. So what this tool can do, aside from the animation, kind of way to look at it year by year, here's some other things, is to ensure all stakeholders are on board early and that the role of each is realistic. You can actually sit down with all the different stakeholders and map this out together to make sure everybody's on the same page in terms of resources needed and required. It can shed light on hidden costs for some stakeholders. You're going to look hard at contributions, hard. Who's donating things that may not be coming up on record within your accounting systems or any accounting system. Identify resistant actors and try to lean in early on collaborative solutions. For example, I know of some organizations who may have had pushback from like teachers' unions, but if they can sit down and have a collaborative discussion early on, then it can help move what could be just pebbles out of the way before they become boulders. Just ping them out of the way. You can predict challenges and opportunities before a single dollar is spent. You can assess for equity challenges and address those as needed. You can identify cost variation across time and stakeholders. You can identify who's responsible for those key resources and if that control affects pricing and availability. So, for example, gas, who's responsible for gas? Who's responsible for the cost of replacing teaching and learning materials? Who's responsible for the cost of the tablets? And does that control affect your pricing and availability at all? So you can take this very next level. And the bottom line, as previously mentioned, is to the extent that you can, especially the government resources, line those up with the budgets to assess viability for this. Okay, so that is today. That is all I have to say at the moment. We're ending 2 minutes early. And unless you have questions, which I'm happy to address, but if I don't say it, I am deeply, deeply grateful for your time. Things are really kind of scary out there right now. And to the extent that GSF and I at SALT and my team can help you, we really want to do that. So do tell GSF what you need, and we will do the best that we can to support you so that we can continue making a difference in the lives of the people who most need it. All right. It's been my pleasure and honor. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Chris, for running us through both sessions. Thank you for your time today. Thank you, everyone, for bringing your questions, challenges, work, brain power, and heart to these sessions. Brief survey, just like last time. Just let us know what went well, what we could do better. We're always here to improve our support to our network. So we really, really value feedback. So just let us know, and then you're free to go. And we'll see you in some other place, some other time.